Hello and welcome to the webinar. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. This is an exclusive client webinar that Ease is providing for our customers, and we've had a pretty big response to all this, and we have a lot of familiar names here online with us today, so thank you very much for joining. Let me get started a little bit with a bit of a welcome and some information you should have right now. We're going to run this webinar to about 12:45 today. And you should hear the audio now, obviously. If not, I have some dial-in information as well as an access code. This information was provided to you in your email as well. This is a live event right now, and recording it as well. We did have requests for some folks who couldn't attend, and we'll try to provide a recorded rebroadcast for everyone. And then most importantly for the event today too, there's also some questions you can feed back to us. We've had a few already from some emails, but you have a control panel, and in your control panel, you have a questions tab that you can pop down. We'll keep an eye on that to either cover a few items during the webinar. And Tom's saying that the phone number does not seem to be working. Hopefully this is helping you out now, Tom, with the new correct number. I did look this up online. Tom, if that number does not work, please put another question in there and we'll look it up again for you as well. So you should see this right now. I'll keep an eye for any other questions that come up, but we'll get started. So my name is Dave Kyle, and welcome Matt Schmidt.
Hi, Dave.
Matt and I provide a lot of webinars for our clients like yourself, but also some potential clients. So we wanted to do something special today in light of the circumstances that were announced from Equifax a couple weeks ago. And Matt and I have been both providing these webinars to legal, accounting, nonprofits, and educational accounts for quite some time now. I've actually delivered a longer version of this particular presentation to our partners over at the MSATPA in a longer program. So this is sort of a condensed version, a little more contemporary and current to what the situations were, and some very specific actionable items that you can choose to take based on what we're going to share with you here today as well. So again, want to thank everyone for joining us today. As clients of Ease Technologies, we really appreciate your business and want to provide you something special and unique. A lot of our webinars are more business and general related. This is something specific to you as an individual, of an employer and a client of ours. So let's get started. So Matt, you want to cover the agenda for us here real quick?
Sure. We're going to talk today about specifically the Equifax compromise. Explain it to you, explain who they are, how it could affect you, and kind of what you should do. And then we'll talk about some other common threats to your personal information and give you some kind of tips on how to keep yourself protected. And then we'll take questions from people if they have any.
Yeah, we have a couple that we'll cover at the end if we don't, that was mailed in, as I mentioned. So let's first talk about identity theft. As I'm sharing here with this definition, it's kind of a broad area actually, and you hear it used in different ways, but identity theft begins when someone takes your personal identifiable information, and such as your name, social security number, date of birth, your mother's maiden name, and your address, to use it without your knowledge or permission, and ultimately they're cyber thieves or someone's going to use it for some sort of financial gain against you. And it's a broad area. It's not just credit cards. It's not just tax scams. It's the most important thing in the case of this situation. The very specific and the jewels of your personal information are centered around your social security number and date of birth and things like that. And that's what makes this particular situation with Equifax so egregious. Identity theft. Do you want to cover a little bit about?
Sure.
How this happened? I mean, just some other information.
Yeah, here are the horrifying statistics. So about 10 million incidents per year of identity theft, according to the FTC. We're $5.8 billion a year paid out in fraudulent tax refunds. So that's, and we'll talk about this a little more later, but that's people that are filing taxes with somebody else's information and collecting a refund. 32% of incidents of identity theft are by a family member, which I think is a little distressing. 18% are by a friend or an in-home employee, and 20% of victims are in their 20s. Yeah. So young people are not immune to this. It's not just, people preying on older people. This is a problem shared by everyone.
Yeah, probably the disappointing part of all this is what you mentioned, Matt, is half of all identity theft originates by someone you know. And that's a lot. I mean, we're
Sad.
talking, yeah, we're talking about the Equifax breach, which is, it's because it's a large number and people know about it. But for a long time and still today, a lot of this originates from somebody you know.
And we're not asking you to not to trust anybody, but we're going to share with you some steps to take just to make sure that your personal information is secure from everyone.
Yeah. So identity theft, what ends up occurring then, of course, is the most obvious ones you might see or recognize as credit cards. That's a fraudulent activity. It's someone takes your credit card and uses it, and you quickly and easily can call up your credit card company if you know about it and get those claims taken off your credit cards, and you get new ones sent in. Some more egregious things happen with identity theft, and that's somebody can take out loans in your name with cars and homes. Then ultimately what they're using for this data is those social security numbers and driver's license to take your identity over as a whole. That becomes much more difficult to get past. Recently, in the last, I'd say 3 to 6 years, the IRS tax refund claims have been a real issue. And then there's kind of a newer one, which is healthcare fraud. And Matt and I were talking about this earlier, which is this particular situation is someone claims your identity and uses your information to secure themselves for healthcare, whether it be a surgery or procedure, any kind of thing. And it seems kind of like, well, how could they do that? Well, the challenge for you that could happen is twofold. One is they're using your identity, could compromise your credit, things like that. But you're left with some sort of burden financially in many cases, because most healthcare insurance does not cover anyone 100%. So again, protecting your information could fall in all these areas. Certainly the healthcare fraud is a little bit newer, not as prevalent, but it's out there.
Yeah, that was a new one for me. It's pretty disturbing.
Yeah. So Matt, you want to share with everyone a little bit about what do we have on the screen right now?
Sure. So this is kind of our little sheet of the most, I would say the most egregious and largest events, breaches that have happened, including the Equifax one that happened most recently, but also some very serious ones, anything from the IRS to Care First, MedStar Health. I think Home Depot and Target are interesting because the point of sale systems were actually broken into. So it's not just people who are shopping online, but it was personal information of people that were going into the stores and using their credit cards in the stores. So it's not just online shopping. It's not just being online that's an issue here. These groups have had some major problems.
Yeah, I think the number that we're seeing, this is kind of why we're doing this particular webinar. It's almost the point where, some type of information of yourself or anyone at this point, has been compromised. It's just, you can't help but see the number of breaches or examine what they are. Personal information is out there right now in a lot of different ways, and you're going to start having, if you aren't already, to be a little proactive about how you deal with it. Let's talk about some different types of online compromise, because the big challenge is you hear about so many different things. And what are they? What do they mean? And how does it affect you personally or your business? So personal information are the ones we're talking about today. And this is where, things like Maryland had, I think it was like 300,000 people were compromised with social security numbers and addresses and things like that. Equifax, which we'll talk about in detail. We'll also talk about another OPM compromise that happened 2 years ago. Other ones are compromises that occur to organizations and even sometimes individuals. This particular one we're talking about is ransomware. I'm not going to cover that today, as well as the other ones I'm going to mention here in a second. Those are more business related. We do have other webinars for those. Intellectual property is a big problem, as well as wire transfer heists. Most of these are business related, and we do have some other webinars that we provide a couple times a year that we'll announce to you as well in the future if you want to be aware of those. But again, we're focusing on personal information. One of the bigger hacks was the OPM hack. Matt, we want to talk about that one for us?
Yeah, so this was a federal database that kind of is a database of not only all federal employees, but also their spouses and also any contractors that do work for the government. So this was, at the time, a very massive breach of 21 million names. And in addition to the personal information, like social security numbers, this one unfortunately also lost track of 5.6 million fingerprint records. So this was a very serious breach, and it was done through an email phishing scheme with a contractor to the government. So it was a third party trying to get access to bigger targets.
Yeah, and email phishing attacks are the more common way that compromises originate. And that's those emails that you get that you seem kind of ridiculous in some cases that have attachments. In some of our other previous webinars, we educate everyone about the dangers of some of these emails, but that's how most compromises originate, is from email phishing attacks. So the Equifax breach, let's explain some of that. And Matt, do you want to kind of cover how that occurred?
Yeah, so first let's step back and just explain to everyone who may not be aware what Equifax is. So Equifax is a credit reporting agency. They are a private company, and there are three major credit reporting bureaus and smaller credit reporting bureaus, and there's one large one that we'll talk about a little later. But Equifax is one of the largest of the three main ones, and they basically collect personal information, including social security numbers, addresses, driver's license, all your credit history. So when somebody does a credit check for you, whether you're trying to open up a new credit card, refinance or get a mortgage, even renting an apartment, businesses are going to do credit checks on you, and they're going to go to these three main companies to check your credit. So the fact that you may not be a customer directly buying services from Equifax in this matter doesn't matter at all, because they're probably collecting information on you to use in credit checks for other businesses. So with this one, we're talking about 143 million people affected by this breach. And I am one of those people, unfortunately. My wife and I were both on the list. The breach occurred from around March to July of 2017. So it went on for quite a bit of time, and it was due to unpatched servers that people got into.
Yeah, which is kind of unusual. I'd say 80% to 90% of all online compromises are done through phishing attacks, as you described. So this is kind of unusual, but still happened nonetheless. In my family, I went through about 5 of us, and only my one child was affected by this. Now, there is some question of whether or not how accurate some of this data is. When you talk about 143 million people, that's pretty much half of all adults in the country or more. So, the odds are that there's a high incident rate on this particular situation, and it's even, they claim it wasn't their main database, but it seems like a lot of people to me.
That's an awful lot to not be the main.
Yeah. So how could this affect you? And this is, we'll cover it a couple different ways, but in generally, your personal information can be sold off. And how that's done typically is these cyber thieves gather your information. They'll carve it up into smaller pieces. So they'll sell it off in lots of 10,000, 50,000, 100,000 names. They'll put them on forums or dark web forums that are called dark web, and they'll sell off these in chunks. And then people buy them in chunks. No one's buying all 143 million names. And they take these names and information and go after you in a couple different ways. And for this situation, it's identity theft. It can be the tax scams we talked about. So they'll take out credit card fraud. Credit cards would make fraudulent claims there. Healthcare situations, again, not as prevalent, but it's starting to occur more often. And this ultimately, again, going to affect you financially, but also more affect your credit ratings down the road if you're not catching up with some of this stuff. So let's talk about what Equifax is doing to kind of help you out with this particular situation. I know, Matt, you jumped in it kind of early, so you want to share with us a little bit?
I did, as soon as I saw my name on the list. So so the second bullet on this slide shows you the website that you can go to check whether you are a part of this breach, and it is equifaxsecurity2017.com. And I would recommend that you type that into your web browser and not click on any links or anything, because there have been some fraudulent websites set up by people trying to capture more information from unsuspecting people. So make sure you go to that specific website to check your name. And Equifax is offering for a year trusted ID credit monitoring and the ability for free to freeze your credit report. And I think we're going to talk about that a little bit later, about what that means and what you can do. But if you are on there, you want to take advantage of these services.
Yeah, the credit monitoring one is one that you'll see from any number of organizations once you've gotten compromised. So basically, it's a way of monitoring your credit, notifying you after certain credit communications have happened, it does nothing though to protect you. Okay, so it's really important. Just because you sign up for it doesn't mean you're protected. Not even close. All that means is they'll provide you access to notices about people who've inquired about your credit. And you, not just Equifax, but there's actually some websites out there that list all the companies out there that have been compromised and who's offering free credit services. And you can't help but try to find somebody that you probably could get to that, you get free credit monitoring for yourself. Let's take a little step further, Matt. So this is the page I think you used or you shared with us.
Once you go to that website and you click on check vulnerability, this is the site that you'll see, and this is where you put in your last name, your last six digits of your social security number, and then verify that you're a human. And then that will tell you whether you are or are not on the list of people who are breached. Now, I've read some reporting that may not be accurate. So our advice is if you are on the list, take precautions. And if you're not on the list, you may also want to still take precautions, because what we're going to talk about today is becoming good practice just based on the number of breaches that have occurred.
Yeah, can't help but have to think about that. As we were describing to you already, if you weren't affected in this breach, you've been probably affected elsewhere somewhere along the way, certainly in the last 2 or 3 years.
And if you haven't checked your name or your spouse's name or any kids before this webinar, please do so immediately afterwards.
So what can you do next? First thing we're going to talk about is this credit freeze. And let's describe what a credit freeze actually is doing. Again, Matt described what these credit bureaus are all about. They're gathering information, whether you want to or not, about yourself. And how the process typically works is, if you're about to apply for a car loan, let's say, you walk into a Toyota dealership, Toyota is then going to contact one of these credit bureaus to see what kind of customer they're going to work with about providing you credit. A credit freeze essentially freezes everything down. So if you were to walk into the Toyota dealership and still had your credit freeze, they would not be able to gain any access or any information about you. And with that freeze in place, they're not going to want to extend you any credit, because they don't think about you at that point.
Right.
So this credit freeze is something that prohibits lenders from seeing anything about you at this point, your history, how your credit worthiness is. So to do this, the credit freeze must be done with all of the credit bureaus. As Matt did, I went to Equifax, TransUnion, and Experian and did it. And Matt, you even went to the fourth one as well.
Yeah, and Innovus is the largest of the smaller bureaus that collect that. So I actually froze my credit report with them as well, just to be extra cautious.
I did it with all three. It took me about 45 minutes. They ask you a variety of questions. You have some very Social Security and addresses. They were asking a variety of things about previous addresses and loans and things like that to kind of verify who I was. Equifax is free right now. The other one, either Experian or TransUnion, was free as well, and one of them only charged me $5, so it was not very costly and was pretty easy to do. They try to ask you about other credit monitoring services, just so you know too, and they talk about trying to use some other name-branded services they have. I only elected to do the freeze and stuck with just the freeze only, and that way no one, because if you look at some of the extended services, locks they call them, you still are able to provide information to customers of theirs. So basically the real customers for these 3 or 4 companies is not us, it's the lending organizations.
Right.
So by putting a freeze, no one can see your information. By putting a lock, all it does is still provide access for information in some ways to market to those companies, or your information to be marketed elsewhere. So a freeze is really
it's the safest option,
incomplete option
right.
for yourself.
Yeah.
Now there is some hassle with all this. I was talking about it with my wife because I talked to her about doing this. She goes, "Well, I don't want to have that happen, because what if I need to get to my credit and have other people look at it?" And certainly that's an important thing to do. You can unfreeze your credit. I think, Matt, you encountered and thought that it may take a certain number of days in some situations.
Yeah, it seems to vary between the credit bureaus, anywhere from 48 hours to 5 days to unfreeze the credit to open it up. So if you know that you're going to be making a large purchase, a house, a car, something
Right.
like that, you're going to want to plan ahead. So there is an inconvenience factor that people need to take into account. I actually had a conversation with somebody that owns a small business,
Yeah.
and they were in the position where every time they had to purchase equipment, which happened weekly, their credit
Yeah.
got checked every time. So it was not necessarily an option. In that case, maybe the lock made more sense because that's actually an instant on and off
Right.
versus the credit freeze, which is, again, more safe, but takes forethought and planning.
So somebody should get their credit frozen. Putting a credit freeze in place would be someone who's maybe has a house, has a car, has some credit cards, kind of things are established and not things are going to change for a while. Someone, as Matt described, who's in a situation where either soon or regularly they're having to, have access, people are going to need access to the credit, may not be the right fit for them at this point in time. So just knowing that ahead of time is important to make that decision for yourself. Again, it's not for everybody, but it's certainly an important point. And it doesn't prevent everything. We'll be very clear. It doesn't stop all types of fraud, for example. It does not stop tax scams, for example.
Right. But it will help.
Yeah, it mitigates. Nothing can be done to stop all these compromises, but all you can do is take steps to mitigate the issue. One thing we suggest that you do as well before you take this on is to get a snapshot of your credit so you have something to look at. I just did this as well. The website's annualcreditreport.com. All three of the major organizations provide information there for you. You can get your credit reports for free. I downloaded those and held on to that, and it's important to keep that information for you.
Now, what's the PIN number?
Yeah, let's take a look at that. So when you're doing a credit freeze process, what they do is they provide for you as a PIN number. And this PIN number is really critical for you to hold on to and keep a printed copy. I would do it that way, and put it either in a personal safe or a safety deposit box that you can get back to. The PIN number is anywhere between 6 and 9 digits in number that you can use then to unfreeze your credit. So it's really critical you have all three of these. So as I did it, I printed out each of these 3 pins I needed to have for myself, and I put it in a secure place for me to get back to when I need to later on, where I keep a whole bunch of secured information so I wouldn't forget it. So really important. Save your PIN numbers. Don't lose them. Use them again to get back to unfreezing your credit. So to sort of continue with our conversation about a broader aspect of identity theft, Matt, here's a list here of the top 10 states where identity theft occurs. And actually, Florida looks like to be almost twice as much as some of most of the other states. And why is that?
Retirees.
Yeah. Sadly, there's a lot of compromises and people are targeted who are seniors. And obviously, Florida has a lot of seniors there. So a lot of identity theft occurs there. But you also notice, too, that Maryland has pretty high number as well, the sixth highest number of as a state, sixth highest in the country is being compromised.
It seems like those are I'm going to go out on a limb. Those are the highest populated states, I would think, between all
Probably.
of them.
Certainly,
or the most retirees.
Yeah,
Arizona and Florida, and then the rest.
But they're doing victims by 100,000, so they're using the ratio. So it's not just numbers of people. It's certainly. I don't know.
But it's not the top 10 list we want to be on.
No, you don't want to be there. That's for sure. Let's mention the IRS tax scam because it's something everyone needs to be aware of. We mentioned it earlier that certainly there was a significant amount of fraudulent tax refunds that are being sent up by the government to cyber thieves or anybody else. Basically, the process is they get your Social Security number, address, personal identifiable information, and they file your taxes early as they can. And maybe in some cases they're filing hundreds, if not thousands of these, and they're trying to get as much money as they can quickly and close up shop and move on somewhere else. So there's quite a number of attempts that this happens. A lot of times this is getting stopped, but there aren't a lot of checks and balances in place just yet to really prevent these kind of things from happening. The IRS has some ways of doing it. It really only helps you. They have PIN systems as well, but only after you've gotten compromised. It's very difficult to get a protection for yourself if you want to be proactive. And some of this also affects state taxes as well. So suggestion here for you is whenever possible, file your taxes as early as possible. And sadly, that's about the best suggestion we can provide for you because the credit agencies are not connected to these tax scams. The IRS does not check with the credit bureaus to know whether or not you are creditworthy. It's just, they receive the taxes and they have systems in place as best they can to see if it's a legitimate tax return or not. But as you can see already, there's billions of dollars that are fraudulently returned to people because they can't identify these situations. Matt, do you want to talk about some other ones? And one commonly we hear about is these fake phone calls.
Yeah, I get one a week, I think now. So I will get probably one call a week from somebody claiming to be in Windows or from Windows, calling about a virus on my computer system. I don't have any Windows devices in my home, so I know it's a fake call. We've also gotten calls about an IRS audit, and we've gotten calls about a sheriff's office trying to serve papers. So all of this is trying to create this sense of urgency so that you will take some action, whether that be, give out personal information over the phone in terms of the computer company calling. They want you to go to a website to download something onto your computer, probably some kind of malware where they can collect more information, passwords, credit card information, that sort of thing. So it's never a good idea to give out personal information to any of these callers, and this is basically an education thing here. There's not much more that you can do. All I can tell you is that Microsoft, Apple, Google, they're not going to call you at home to tell you there's something wrong with your computer. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, in case of businesses, these fake phone calls are used in combination with emails. And for businesses, you need to be very wary of this as well. Like I said, we have some other webinars, we use some of this. So if phone calls, are still a viable way of fraud that happens out there. So you still need to be not letting your guard down, especially you need to share it with other people. Again, especially in those states where seniors are,
Exactly.
they really target those folks in these kind of situations. So let's share with you a few other things you should be doing to help protect yourself. And this one's particularly for online. I really, and we've in other webinars and emails and blog posts, I share a lot about this, but really using some good password policies for yourself. Using very complex passwords. Here's an example here of uppercase, lowercase, numeric, special characters, things like that are things you really need to be doing pretty regularly. Using different passwords across your site. So if you're using one password for Facebook, please don't be using it for your banking account. Change your passwords. I know it's difficult and not something fun to do, but certainly you need to be conscious of the fact that you have these passwords out there. They need to be changed in a certain amount of time. We'll talk about a password manager in a second and what we do at Ease Technologies to help some of you out. Auto-locking your devices, meaning your cell phones, your laptops, your desktop computers. Make sure they automatically lock after a certain period of time, so somebody can't walk up to your device and gain access to what's on your phone or your laptop or your computer. And finally, also using two-step authentication. And let's explain that one, Matt, because that's a newer thing to have happen. More people are running into it, but why you should use it. Do you want to kind of cover that a little bit for us?
Sure. Yeah, it's actually been around for a long time in the military space, where they had these RSA token generators. But basically, it's what it means. Two things. So two-factor authentication is something which is going to be your password, or something you remember in that case, and then something you have, which is a phone or a smartwatch or something that can verify not only the password, but that it's you. So in this case, we're kind of showing a picture of a tool that we use internally called AuthAnvil, which generates a token on demand that, in addition to our password, verifies, we know the password, and we have this on our smartphone that generates a token that verifies it is who we are. And this is becoming more and more common for different applications. Things like Dropbox allows this type of authentication, so it's not just passwords. You're verifying that you are who you say you are.
Yeah, so certain accounts like your Apple account, Google, a lot of these things that you opt in to two-factor authentication, and you provide them your phone number. So if you were to log into it from a new unrecognizable device like a new laptop, it would say to you, look, we're going to send you a two-factor authentication code you need to enter in, so we can just verify that it is you. Banking information, of course. I know my 401k plans do this for us, other investment areas I have. So a lot of places are doing this, and if you can opt in, I'd highly encourage it. Some of it, again, is really frustrating. I know my wife and I share some credit card information, and that particular one has two-factor authentication, and we're seem to be battling on Saturday mornings about whose number is this going to, so we can check the banking information, the credit card information. But it's really important that you do these kind of things. We use this internally at Ease as well, and we're also providing and sharing some of this for many of our accounts and trying to encourage you to utilize two-factor authentication on your emails and business accounts and things like that. We use it internally to keep ourselves protected so that you're protected. So we want to let you know that we're doing this today already. And I know that Chris Bubeck and Matt and Jason Sheridan are all, talking to everyone about, how you could implement two-factor authentication process for yourselves as well. And we highly encourage you to consider something like this. Password managers is part of this process of two-factor authentication. Again, with two-factor authentication, there's a way that you can actually store all these passwords. And we have a program called Authenticator that lets you manage all your passwords. And whether you do it with a business with a program called Authenticator, or if you do it just personally, I know personally I use a program called Password Manager, or 1Password.
1Password, yeah.
Matt actually turned me on to this a number of years ago.
Yeah, I don't think I could do, I try to have really complex long passwords now,
Yeah.
and there's no way I could manage them all without some kind of password manager. And 1Password for me on the personal side it has worked well for years. And it's military grade encryption, and it basically stores everything that you need, so you can come up with very long, sometimes I've done 22 character passwords with multiple symbols and numbers. My brain cannot handle it.
Right.
I gave up, and I use 1Password, and I've been happy ever since.
So for two-factor authentication, password managers, for a personal situation, we recommend 1Password. For business purposes, we're recommending Authenticator. And we're helping our customers utilize all that if need be. Some other final suggestions here on mobile safety. Be careful about taking advantage of free Wi-Fi. That free Wi-Fi at the airport is typically a honeypot for someone to go to a bad place. So just be very careful about some of these places that offer free Wi-Fi.
Well, and even if you are using free Wi-Fi, be aware of what you're connected to. So maybe if you're just surfing the web, it doesn't matter, but don't put your credit card information in there. Don't use your banking while you're connected to free Wi-Fi.
Hotels have been notorious lately of having problems with some of this. People are setting up spoofing systems within a hotel. So I highly encourage you to use things like VPNs, virtual private networks, that if you travel quite a bit, that you can utilize to keep your data protected while it's transmitting across the airwaves or just across the internet as well. Other devices, services like Find My iPhone help you find your devices if they're lost. And I already mentioned, auto lock your devices as much as you can. So if something does find it, it isn't wide open, that they can see your personal information from there. So finally, we're going to kind of summarize, I would call 8 important steps to keep yourself protected, whether it be online or at home. Credit card alerts, those are an option that if your bank or your credit card company can do. I use it all the time now, so every time there's a purchase, I know what it is. So if it looks like it's not right, I know that it's not right. I can call up my credit card company and work with them very quickly to stop any kind of fraud going on. Monitor your credit at least once a year, as we suggested with that one website. Provide regular backups to your data that you have. Keep your devices updated, and follow some good password policies. What are some other things, Matt, you think you want to do?
Use a shredder, because believe it or not, people will still go through your garbage looking for bank statements or credit card statements, anything that has any kind of personal identifiable information on there. They'll use that. So it's still good practice to use a shredder. Secure your personal information. Don't hand it out to family members or have it readily available laying around. And as we said, file your taxes early.
On the personal information one, again, there's a variety of people. If you're having somebody work in your house, you have cleaning people. I mean, it's your house is your kingdom kind of thing, I guess. But you also got to make sure that nothing's laying around. So if you have even a drawer or a safety deposit box you take stuff to, or a safe, you just keep all that personal stuff away from everyone.
Yep.
I'll open the floor up to some questions. I know that Katie asked a question or made a comment. I'm going to read it back for everyone here. I understand some people get different answers each time they check in whether or not they've been a victim. I'm assuming what she's talking about is the Equifax. Yes, and that's been part of the problem and why we're doing this, is that, yes, people have gotten different answers going to the Equifax site. Either they say, yes, you have been compromised, or no, you haven't been compromised, and it isn't very clear. And that's why we've been suggesting that maybe the answers they're providing to everybody are not correct. and you still need to go about, if it's the right thing for you, of doing the credit freeze kind of thing for yourself.
Yeah, I mean, there have been so many instances now of breaches that is just good practice. I mean, in the old days, we talk about credit freeze. In the old days, people used to be afraid that that would have a negative impact on your credit.
Yeah,
but I think it's going to be standard operating
Yeah.
procedure going forward now.
Yeah, and also the other thing we found, all these credit card breaches or anything along these lines, the number they come up with first always seems to grow later on. You know, the OPM hack was 4 million, then it was 12 million, then it was 21 million. You know, same thing with these credit card breaches with Home Depot. First it was 10 million, and then it was 40 million. So they, you know, to have a real number, 143 million seems like it's a lot of people, and odds are you've gotten compromised.
Check the chat.
A couple other questions. One was, what about children? Should you, do any of this or put anything in place to help protect your kids? You should follow the things we talked about. From the credit freeze standpoint, I think you need to make a decision. Like, for example, my daughter's 24. I'd like to say yes, and she actually has been compromised. I need to talk with her about, what's going to happen with her in the next 6 to 8 months, and whether or not she's going to need to get access to her credit, because she was identified as being compromised. So it's a case-by-case situation. If you can, do it. Children are compromised as well. They're not as readily or easily compromised. They don't have as great credit, so they're not as apt to give away as much money, but they can be victims as well.
And as we showed in one of those statistics, that people in their 20s are still compromised by these frauds. So
oftentimes they're just not looking. They don't notice or even recognize they have a situation going on. And speaking of recognizing, the question we answer, and here's one here as well, is about what about LifeLock? LifeLock, I've read over that several times. I'm electing not to use LifeLock, not because I don't think they're a good organization. I think they are. I think they're more of a monitoring service, and right now I don't feel like I need my credit monitored. I need my credit protected.
Right.
And LifeLock's going to provide you the same kind of monitoring services that you may get from any one of the 3 credit bureaus. Nothing that LifeLock or anything else is going to do is going to prevent someone from compromising your personal information. All they're going to be able to do is tell you about when something happened. So monitoring is great. I think you need to take some extra, more prudent steps in these kind of situations. The other thing that LifeLock claims they can do is they can look into the dark web and see in databases and see if your personal information is there. Yeah. I'm already assuming it's there.
I'm skeptical too that they can actually do that.
Yeah. So I think it's a great service for some people, and maybe with combination of freezing your credit, it may be a good thing to do. I think probably the bigger danger would be is saying you've got LifeLock or a company like that, and you're good to go. You don't have to worry about it anymore. That's not the case at all. If you had LifeLock and freeze your credit, you still have the concerns I suggested to you earlier, and need to be diligent about kind of keeping an eye on things for yourself.
And I do think that this may change how these credit bureaus work, and how credit checks are done may change over time, just based on the fact that they're holding so much information, and now Equifax is at least the first kind of brick to fall here. But you need to take responsibility for your own information and making sure that your credit report is secure. So that's why we're making the recommendations we're making today.
Great. So want to thank you all very much for attending and joining us today. Please email me any questions at dave@easetech.com. I think all of you are attending because you have received the invitation for this, so you do have my email. Please check out our website. We've been doing some updating to our branding at our website, and love to hear your feedback. And I know I'm looking outside the window here. The whole team out there is feverishly working on supporting you right now in the help desk, and we really love working with all you, and thank you very much. We love referrals, and hopefully you enjoy our services from the help desk and our folks on site for you, and some of these educational programs that we're providing for you as we're doing today. So if you do think of someone who might enjoy our services, please ask that you do share it with them or with us. We'd love to talk to them and see how we might be a fit. So Matt, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And again, thank you all for joining us today, and look forward to catching up with you shortly.
Take care, everybody.